Hello everyone, if you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
The shower doubt. Imagine standing under a hot shower, the steam fogging up the glass, and your brain suddenly asks you a question so ridiculous that you almost laugh out loud. That happened to me last fall. I was scrubbing off a long day at work, my hands still smelling of cheap coffee and printer ink, and out of nowhere, my own voice inside my head said, "What if a tiny, imperfect, handmade gift could do more damage than any expensive store-bought thing?" I froze. The water kept running, and I thought, that's insane, right? But here's the thing, a few weeks later, I was standing in front of my American boss, the most intimidating woman I had ever met, watching her cry. Not fake tears, not polite sniffles. Real, messy, mascara running, no sniffling crying. And the reason? A small, clumsy, hand-sewn something that I had made at 2 in the morning on my kitchen table. You probably think I'm exaggerating. I'm not. And if you're someone who has ever felt that your English isn't good enough, or your efforts are too small to matter, or that you need to buy love and respect with expensive things, stay with me. This story might just break your brain a little. In the next 90 minutes, I'm going to tell you a true story from my life here in the United States. It's about culture, marriage, kids, and one moment that changed how I see everything. But first, let me ask you something real. Have you ever given someone a gift and felt your heart pound like it was a bomb? Not because the gift was expensive, but because it was yours, your time. Your shaky hands, your imperfect English written on a card. Yeah, that feeling. That's where this begins. So here's the headline that brought you here. Handmade gift made boss cry, small handmade greater than store gift. And I'm going to answer that question not with theories, but with my own messy, beautiful, exhausting life. Let's start with the boss who never smiled. I work at a small design firm in a busy American city, not New York, not LA, somewhere in between, where people say "ope" when they bump into you and bring casseroles to funerals. My boss, let's call her Diane, is the kind of woman who wears starched white shirts and reads emails before you finish speaking. She's successful, sharp, and famously unimpressed by anything. One time, an employee brought her a $50 box of chocolates for her birthday. She said thank you and put it in the communal break room without opening it. Another time, someone gave her a gift card to a nice steakhouse. She regifted it to the janitor. Diane doesn't do emotions. Or so I thought. I had been working there for about 18 months. My English was okay. I could hold meetings, crack small jokes, and understand most of the slang. But every time Diane looked at me, I felt like a fraud. Like she could see the grammar mistakes hiding in my head. Like she knew that I still dreamed in my mother tongue. That feeling, by the way, is incredibly common. If you're watching this and you're learning English, you felt it too. That moment when you want to say something deep, but the words come out flat and simple. You worry that people think you're boring or dumb, or both. I lived with that fear every single day. And then Christmas came. In American offices, Christmas is a gift-giving minefield. There's pressure to spend money, to find the perfect thing, to prove you care. I watched my coworkers buy scented candles, fancy mugs, and leather journals. They wrapped everything in shiny paper, and wrote cards with flawless cursive, I felt sick. Because I didn't have extra money. I mean, I had rent, groceries, my kids' school supplies, and a husband who was working double shift just to keep us afloat. Buying a nice gift would mean robbing our grocery budget for a week. But not giving anything, that felt worse. That felt like admitting that I didn't belong here. So I did something desperate. I decided to make a gift, by hand, with materials I already owned. Now, before you imagine some Pinterest perfect craft, let me be clear. I am not talented. I cannot draw, sew, or glue things without making a mess. But I had a scrap of fabric from an old shirt, a needle, some thread, and a stupid idea. I stayed up late one night after my kids went to sleep. My husband was at work. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I sat at the kitchen table, my fingers trembling, and I started sewing something tiny. It was supposed to be a small pouch, the kind you put coins in, but it came out lumpy. The stitches were uneven. One side was longer than the other. It looked like something a kindergarten kid would make for Father's Day. I laughed at myself. I almost threw it in the trash. But then I thought about Diane, about how she never smiled, about how she stayed late at work even when everyone else went home, about the photo on her desk, an old black and white picture of a woman who might have been her mother. And I wrote a note. In my broken, hesitant English, I wrote, I made this for you. It's not perfect, but neither is anything that matters. I slipped the lumpy pouch into a brown paper bag and brought it to work the next day. I didn't wrap it. I didn't put a bow on it. I just placed it on Diane's desk when she wasn't looking and ran back to my cubicle. My heart was pounding so hard I couldn't hear my own thoughts. I spent the next 3 hours assuming she had thrown it away. I imagined her laughing with the other managers about the strange immigrant who couldn't even buy a real gift. I started drafting my resignation letter in my head. Then, at 4 o'clock, Diane walked past my cubicle. Her eyes were red. Her face looked different, softer, like someone had taken off a mask. She stopped. She looked at me. And she said 3 words that I will never forget. Come to my office. I followed her like a prisoner walking to the gallows. She closed the door. And then she started to cry. Not a little, a lot. She held the lumpy pouch in her hands like it was made of gold. She said, my mother used to sew things like this. She died 10 years ago. No one has ever given me something that reminded me of her. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there. And in that moment, I understood something huge. In America, people are surrounded by things you can buy. Credit cards, Amazon Prime, same-day delivery. It's all about convenience and speed. But a handmade gift, that's time, that's attention, that's saying, I thought about you while my fingers hurt. And no amount of money can buy that. Diane didn't care about my English mistakes. She didn't care that the pouch was ugly. She cared that I tried, that I made something with my own hands, that I was brave enough to give something imperfect, and that, my friend, is the secret that most people never learn. But here's the twist. That same lesson didn't just work on my boss. It saved my marriage too. And that's where part 2 comes in. My American boss, the wall behind the desk, You know that feeling when you're absolutely sure someone hates you, but you can't prove it. That was my life with Diane for 18 months. She didn't yell. She didn't criticize. She just looked through me like I was a window. And here's the thing about American workplace culture that nobody warns you about. It's not just about doing your job. It's about belonging, about small talk, about laughing at the right jokes, and knowing when to say "How was your weekend?" without sounding like a robot. For someone learning English, that's a nightmare. I remember my first month at the firm, a coworker asked me, "What's up?" And I literally looked at the ceiling. Another time, someone said, "Let's touch base later," and I thought we were going to play a sport. I smiled through all of it, but inside, I was dying. Every conversation felt like a test I hadn't studied for. And Diane, she watched it all with that cold, unreadable face. I convinced myself she thought I was stupid, that she regretted hiring me, that she was just waiting for me to make one big mistake so she could fire me and hire someone who grew up saying "ope" and eating casseroles. That fear ate at me. At night, I would lie awake next to my husband, who was already exhausted from his own double shifts, and I would replay every awkward sentence I had said that day. "Maybe I should quit," I whispered once. He didn't even open his eyes. "You quit everything?" he mumbled, and that hurt more than Diane's stare. But let me rewind a little because you need to understand who Diane really was. See, in America, success often looks cold. People wear suits. They talk fast. They use phrases like "circle back" and "low-hanging fruit" without irony. But underneath that armor, most Americans are just as scared as you are. Diane grew up in a small town in Iowa, the kind of place where everyone knows your parents' names. Her mother was a seamstress. Yes, the one who sewed. Her father left when she was 12. She put herself through college, worked 3 jobs, and built a company from nothing. By the time I met her, she had been divorced twice and hadn't spoken to her only sister in 7 years. She lived alone in a 2-big house with a cat named Chairman Meow. The photo on her desk wasn't just any old picture. It was her mother on her wedding day, wearing a handmade dress. Diane had told exactly one person that story. Until me. And here's the cultural trap that almost destroyed me. When I first came to the United States, I believed that Americans only value big, shiny, expensive things. I saw the trucks, the malls, the endless commercials for jewelry and cars. I thought, to succeed here, I have to buy respect. I spent money I didn't have on clothes I didn't like, hoping to look professional. I bought gift cards for coworkers I barely knew. I even considered leasing a car I couldn't afford because my old sedan looked too poor. That's the lie, and it's a dangerous one. Because when you believe that love and respect are products you can purchase, you'll always feel empty. You'll always feel one step behind. You'll compare yourself to everyone around you and find yourself lacking. I see this in so many people who move to America or even grow up here. They think if I just get the right job, the right house, the right watch, then people will finally see me. But Diane, the cold, untouchable Diane, broke that lie for me with a few tears. That lumpy patch I made, it cost me exactly $0. The fabric came from an old shirt my son had outgrown. The thread was leftover from a sewing kit my mother gave me years ago. The time I spent 2 hours while my family slept. And yet, that ugly little thing did what no expensive box of chocolates or fancy steakhouse gift card could do. It reminded Diane that someone saw her, not her title, not her money. Her, the woman who missed her mother. The girl who learned to sew before she learned to drive. That, my friend, is the real secret of American culture. Yes, people here love convenience and speed. Yes, Amazon delivers everything to your door. Yes, you can buy almost anything with a credit card. But what people actually crave, what every human on this planet craves, is to be known. To have someone look at you and say, I see you. I took time for you. You matter. And that doesn't require perfect English. It doesn't require a paycheck. It requires courage. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's sweet. But what does this have to do with learning English? And what about your husband and kids? I'm getting there, because the same week Diane cried at her desk, my marriage hit a wall. My husband, let's call him Mark, is a good man. A tired man. We had been fighting about everything: money, chores, the kids' school. The way I said yes when I meant no because I didn't know the right English words to disagree politely. He thought I was passive. I thought he was mean. The truth. We were both scared. He was scared that we would never feel at home in America. I was scared that I would never speak English well enough to truly fight for us. And that fear made us small. It made us grab for quick fixes, like buying things we couldn't afford to impress people we didn't like. But after the Diane incident, something shifted inside me. I realized that if a lumpy pouch could crack open a boss's heart, maybe a small, handmade gesture could save my marriage too. Not a grand romantic gesture, not a vacation or a new car. Something smaller, something real. And that's when I started thinking about the cultural differences that had been poisoning our home. You see, Mark grew up in a loud, direct American family where I love you is said every day and arguments are over in 5 minutes. I grew up in a culture where love is shown through action, not words, through cooking, cleaning, sacrificing silently. We were speaking to different languages. Even when we used the same English words, he would say, "Why don't you ever tell me you love me?" And I would say, "I made your favorite dinner," and he would feel unloved, and I would feel unappreciated. That was the real battle. Not English grammar, not pronunciation, but the hidden rules of how we show care. And Diane's tears taught me something that no ASL class ever could. Small, handmade, imperfect acts of attention are universal. They bypass language. They bypass culture. They go straight to the messy, lonely heart that every person carries. So I decided to try an experiment. I wasn't going to buy Mark a gift. I wasn't going to write a long letter in my broken English. I was going to make something with my hands. Something that said, "I see you," something that would either fix us or break us completely. But before I tell you what happened next, and I promise it gets even wilder, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? Have you ever given someone your best effort, only to have them not notice? If yes, then you already know why this story matters, and you won't want to miss what I did next. The cultural wall, when love speaks different languages. Let me tell you about the night I almost walked out. Not from my job, from my marriage. It was a Tuesday, 3 days after Diane cried over my lumpy pouch. My kids were finally asleep. The house smelled like burnt toast and tiredness. Mark came home from his double shift, dropped his lunchbox on the counter, and didn't look at me, not one glance. I had spent 2 hours making his favorite meal, something from my childhood, a recipe my own mother used to make. The kitchen was a disaster. My hands were stained with spices, and he just walked past. "There's food on the stove," I said. "Not hungry," he muttered, and disappeared into the bedroom. That was it. No thank you, no how was your day. No acknowledgement that I existed. I stood there holding a wooden spoon, and something inside me cracked, not dramatically, not with tears, just a quiet, cold snap, like a twig breaking under snow, and I thought, what's the point, you see? Mark and I had been fighting a silent war for months. It wasn't about money anymore, though money was tight. It wasn't about the kids, though they were exhausting. It was about something deeper. We had different love languages, different expectations, different ways of saying I care. And neither of us knew how to translate. In my culture, you show love by doing. You cook. You clean. You sacrifice sleep to make someone's favorite meal. You don't need to say I love you every hour. Your actions are the words. In Mark's American upbringing, love is loud. It's verbal. It's how was your day? And I'm proud of you, and hugs that last longer than 3 seconds. When I silently made him dinner, he didn't see love. He saw chore. When he didn't say anything, I didn't see exhaustion. I saw rejection. This is what I call the cultural wall. And if you've ever moved to a new country, or even married someone from a different background, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You assume everyone sees the world the same way you do. Then one day you realize they don't. And instead of talking about it, you both get hurt and angry and quiet. That Tuesday night, I didn't follow Mark into the bedroom. I turned off the stove, covered the food, and sat alone in the dark living room. I thought about Diane, about how a tiny, imperfect pouch had made her cry because it said something that words couldn't. And I wondered, could the same magic work on a stubborn, tired American husband? Or was our marriage already too broken? Here's what I didn't know yet. Mark was also sitting in the dark, in the bedroom, on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. He wasn't ignoring me because he didn't care. He was ignoring me because he was ashamed. He had just found out that his hours were getting cut. Again. He didn't know how to tell me we might not make rent next month. He didn't have the English words, even though he's a native speaker, to say I feel like a failure. So he said nothing. That's another thing about American culture that surprises people. Americans are often seen as loud and open, but many of them are terrible at talking about real pain. They'll chat about sports and weather for hours, but when it comes to I'm scared or I need help, they shut down. Mark was raised to be strong, to provide, to fix things, and he couldn't fix this, so he hid. And I, with my imperfect English and my habit of showing love through action, interpreted his hiding as rejection. To people, same house, same marriage, completely lost in translation. The next morning, I did something I rarely do. I didn't make breakfast. I didn't pack his lunch. I just got the kids ready for school and left. Mark came home that evening to an empty kitchen. The leftover food from the night before was still on the stove, cold and unappetizing. He later told me that was the moment he felt true fear, not because he was hungry, but because my silence was louder than any English sentence I had ever spoken. That night, we had our first real fight in months, not the quiet kind, the loud, ugly, tear-filled kind. The kids were at a neighbor's house. We yelled. He said, "You don't talk to me." I said, "You don't see me." He said, "I'm working myself to death." I said, "I'm dying alone in this kitchen." And then, in the middle of all that screaming, I picked up a pillow from the couch and threw it at him. Not hard, but it hit him in the chest and fell to the floor. And for some reason, we both stopped. We looked at the pillow, then at each other, and he started laughing, not a mean laugh, a tired, broken, confused laugh. "What was that?" he asked. I didn't know. I just said, "I wanted you to feel something." That night, for the first time in a year, we didn't sleep on opposite sides of the bed. We didn't fix everything, but we talked, really talked. And I told him about Diane, about the lumpy pouch, about how I learned that small, handmade things can break through walls that money and perfect English cannot. He listened. Then he said something that still makes my chest tight. "I don't need a pouch," he said. "I just need you to sit next to me." That was the moment I realized the cultural wall wasn't built by America or by my home country. It was built by our own assumptions. We have both been trying so hard to prove ourselves, me by doing, him by providing, that we forgot to just be present. Handmade gifts are powerful, but presence is even more powerful. And here's the part that will shock you. After that fight, I didn't run out and buy a marriage counseling book. I didn't sign up for an English class focused on relationship vocabulary. I did something smaller. I took a piece of paper, the same kind my kids use for drawing, and I made a tiny coupon book. One coupon said 1 hour of no phones, just talking. Another said I'll make your least favorite chore disappear. Another said I'll say 3 nice things about you, in English, without laughing. They were ugly. The handwriting was messy. I spelled a few words wrong. But I put them in an envelope and left it on his pillow. He found it at midnight when he came home from work. He woke me up, which he never does, and said, "Did you make these?" I nodded, half asleep, and he cried, just like Diane, a big, ugly American cry. That was the beginning of our real happy ending. But we're only on part 3. There's so much more. The kids, the school, the moment I almost gave up on English entirely, and the surprising thing that saved me. Stick around, because part 4 is where everything almost fell apart again. The stupid idea that saved everything. You know that moment right before you do something truly embarrassing. The split second when your brain screams, "Don't do it," but your hands are already moving. That's where I found myself 1 week after the coupon book incident. Things with Mark were better, not perfect, but better. He had started saying thank you when I made dinner. I had started saying I love you out loud, even though the words felt strange and wobbly in my mouth. But something else was brewing, something darker. You see, Diane had not forgotten the lumpy pouch. In fact, she had done something unexpected. She had put it on her desk, right next to the photo of her mother, and people noticed. My coworkers started looking at me differently, not in a bad way, in a curious way. They would stop by my cubicle and ask, "What did you give Diane? She never keeps anything." And I would mumble something about just a small sewing project. But then the questions got harder. "Can you make one for me? I'll pay you." "Do you have an Etsy shop?" I laughed at first. "Me? Sell my ugly, lumpy pouches? That would be like a cat selling its hairballs." But the requests kept coming. Within 2 weeks, 6 different people had asked me to make them something handmade, personal, imperfect. And that's when the stupid idea hit me. What if I started a tiny business? Not a real business, just a small, weekend thing. I could make simple gifts, pouches, bookmarks, little sewn hearts. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just time and thread and a piece of my attention. I mentioned it to Mark one night while we were doing dishes. He stopped scrubbing and looked at me like I had grown a second head. "You want to sell your crafts?" he said. "Babe, you can barely sew a straight line." He wasn't being mean. He was being honest. And that honesty stung because he was right. My stitches were crooked. My fabric choices were weird. One of my pouches had accidentally turned into a triangle instead of a rectangle. But here's the thing about American culture that I was only beginning to understand. In the US, perfection is overrated. Yes, people love shiny things from big stores. Yes, Amazon ships millions of perfect, factory-made products every day. But there is also a hunger, a deep, hungry craving for something real, something that has a story, something that is clearly made by human hands that trembled. I had seen it with Diane. I had seen it with my own husband, who kept that ugly coupon book in his nightstand drawer like it was a winning lottery ticket. So I decided to ignore Mark's skepticism. I raided my tiny fabric stash, most of it from old clothes and donated scraps. I bought nothing new. I spent my evenings after the kids went to sleep sitting at the kitchen table, sewing by the weak light of a clip-on lamp. My fingers hurt. My back ached. I messed up constantly, but I didn't stop. I made 7 pouches. Each one was different. Each one was ugly in its own special way. One had a flower that looked more like a bruised potato. Another had a button that was slightly off-center. But I wrapped each one in a simple brown paper bag and wrote a short note. Made by hand, made for you, imperfect on purpose. I gave them to my coworkers for free, not as gifts, as experiments. I wanted to see what would happen, and what happened shocked me. The first person who got one, a quiet IT guy named Steve who never talked to anyone, came back to my desk an hour later. His eyes were wet. "My grandmother used to sew," he said. "She died last year. This is the first thing that has made me feel close to her." Another coworker, a young woman named Jessica, who always wore designer clothes, put her pouch in her purse and said, "I'm going to keep this forever. It's better than anything I own from Sephora." By the end of the week, I had requests for 15 more. 15. and I hadn't spent a single dollar on materials. That's when the real lesson hit me. In America, we are drowning in stuff. Perfect stuff. Mass-produced stuff. Stuff that arrives in 2 days and breaks into months. But a handmade gift? That's rare. That's precious. That's something you cannot buy at Target no matter how much money you have. And here's the part that will blow your mind. I didn't need perfect English to do any of this. My notes were short. Sometimes I spelled things wrong. One note accidentally said "you are remembered" instead of "remembered." Nobody cared. They cared that I had taken time. They cared that I had touched the fabric, tied the knots, and thought about them while my hands were busy. This is the secret that most English learners never realize. You don't need to sound like a native speaker to connect with people. You need to show up. You need to try. You need to offer something real, even if it's ugly, even if it's misspelled, even if it makes you want to hide under your desk. So I kept sewing, and something unexpected happened. My English started improving, not because I was studying grammar books, but because I was talking to people. Real people, coworkers who stopped by to see what I was making. They would ask questions. I would answer. They would correct me gently, not in a mean way, but in a helpful way. It's remembered, not remembered, Jessica said once, laughing. And I laughed too, because it wasn't a test. It was a conversation. That's how you really learn a language. Not by memorizing vocabulary lists, but by making things, giving things, and allowing yourself to be imperfect in front of others. By the end of that month, I had made over 30 handmade gifts. Not one of them was perfect, but every single person who received one smiled. Some cried. Most asked for more. And Diane, my cold, untouchable boss, quietly promoted me to a new role. Not because I was the best worker, but because she said, "You know how to make people feel seen. That's more valuable than any skill in this company." But here's where the story takes a turn. Right when things were going well, my kids started struggling at school, and that almost broke me. Because no matter how many pouches I sewed, I couldn't protect them from the cruelty of children. I couldn't sew a pouch that would stop the bullying. Or could I? That's part 5. And I promise you, it's the most shocking part of all. The late night craft, sewing in the dark while the world falls apart. You think you know pain when you mess up a sentence in front of your boss. You think you know fear when your husband won't look at you. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepares you for the moment your child comes home from school with tears on their face and says, "They don't like me because I talk different." That happened on a Thursday. My daughter, Lily, was 8 years old. She had been born here, in the United States. Her English was perfect, no accent, no grammar mistakes. But her last name wasn't American enough. Her lunch didn't look like the other kids' lunches. And the way I spoke English, slow, careful, sometimes wrong, had become a weapon for other children to use against her. "Your mom talks funny," they said. "Does she even know how to read?" Lily came home that day, dropped her backpack, and didn't say a word. I was at the kitchen table sewing another pouch. This one for a coworker's birthday. My hands were full of thread and fabric. "How was school?" I asked, the way mothers do. She looked at me. Her eyes were red. And then she said something that cut me deeper than any insult I had ever received. Can you please not talk when you pick me up tomorrow? Just wave. Don't say anything. I stopped sewing. The needle was frozen in my hand. What do you mean? I asked, though I already knew. She didn't answer. She just ran to her room and closed the door. That night, I didn't make dinner. I didn't sew. I sat on the couch in the dark, staring at the wall, and I let the worst thoughts crawl into my head. I'm failing them. I whispered to myself. My English is hurting my children. Mark came home late. He found me there, silent and still. He sat next to me and put his hand on mine. Lily told me, he said, she's ashamed. Not of you, of them, of the kids who are mean. But that didn't help, because I knew the truth. In America, your accent, your grammar, your word choice, they are not just tools for communication, they are signals. They tell people where you belong and where you don't. And no matter how many handmade pouches I sewed, I couldn't sew one that would protect my daughter from that. Or could I? The next morning, I did something desperate. I woke up at 4 a.m. before anyone else was awake. I went to the kitchen, pulled out my fabric scraps, and started sewing. Not a pouch this time, something different. I made a small square, like a little blanket, but tiny, just big enough to fit in a palm. On one side, I sewed a rough heart. On the other side, I used a permanent marker to write, I am proud of my mother's voice. I didn't know if it would help. I didn't know if Lily would even accept it. But I had to try. Because the lesson from Diane and from Mark was clear, small, handmade, imperfect things can do what perfect, expensive things cannot. When Lily woke up, I put the little square on her breakfast plate. She stared at it. What's this? She asked. A reminder, I said. For when kids are mean, keep it in your pocket. And when you feel sad, touch it and remember, my voice is not a mistake. It's how I tell you I love you. She looked at the crooked heart and the misspelled words I had written proud with only one O by accident. And for a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then she put it in her pocket, finished her cereal, and went to school. That afternoon, I picked her up, I waved, just like she had asked. But when she got in the car, she reached into her pocket, pulled out the little square, and smiled. I touched it 3 times today, she said. Once when a boy laughed at me. Once when I felt alone at lunch. And once when the teacher asked about my family, and I said my mom makes things with her hands. I almost crashed the car. Not because I was a bad driver, because my heart was so full it hurt. That night, Lily did something she had never done before. She sat next to me at the kitchen table while I was sewing. Can you teach me? She asked. So I did. I showed her how to thread a needle, how to tie a knot, how to sew a straight line, though neither of us could do it perfectly. Her first pouch was a disaster. The stitches were huge. The fabric bunched up. But she put it in her backpack the next day, and she told me later that she gave it to another kid who was being bullied. A new girl from Guatemala who barely spoke English. I told her, Lily said, my mom talks different too, and she's the bravest person I know. That was the moment I understood something profound. The handmade gifts were never about the gifts. They were about the courage to be imperfect, to show up, to say, I am here. And I am trying, and that is enough. My English is still not perfect. I still make mistakes. I still freeze when someone talks too fast. But I stopped hiding. I stopped asking my daughter to pretend I was invisible. Because the real lesson, the one that Diane taught me, that Mark taught me, that Lily taught me, is that people don't fall in love with perfection. They fall in love with effort, with honesty, with the lumpy, crooked, misspelled proof that someone cared enough to try. Now, you might be thinking, this is sweet, but what about the bullying? Did it stop? No, it didn't stop overnight. Kids can be cruel. But something shifted. Lily stopped being ashamed. She started bringing her own handmade squares to school and giving them to other kids who felt lonely. The teacher noticed. She asked if I could come to class and talk about sewing. Me, with my broken English, in front of 20 American children. I said yes, because saying no would have been the real mistake. And that talk, that terrifying, beautiful, stumbling talk changed everything. But I'll tell you about that in part 6. Because part 6 is where I finally stopped being afraid of my own voice. And I promise you, it's worth waiting for. Handing it over, standing in front of 20 American kids with my broken English. The morning of the school talk, I threw up twice. Not a little nervous cough, full, hands on the toilet bowl, sweating through my shirt, throwing up. Mark found me on the bathroom floor, still in my pajamas, shaking like a wet dog. You don't have to do this, he said. And he was right. I could have called the teacher. I could have said I was sick. I could have hidden behind my accent one more time, the way I had been hiding for years. But then I thought about Lily, about the little square she kept in her pocket, about the new girl from Guatemala who didn't have anyone to sit with at lunch. And I thought about Diane, my cold, intimidating boss who cried over a lumpy pouch because someone finally saw her. If a crooked piece of fabric could do that, what could my actual voice do? Even a broken one. So I stood up, rinsed my mouth, and put on a clean shirt. I didn't prepare a speech. I didn't practice my pronunciation. I grabbed a small bag of fabric scraps, a needle, some thread, and the 7 ugliest pouches I had ever made. Then I drove to school. The classroom was bright and loud, the way American elementary schools always are. Posters covered every wall. There was a hamster in a cage. 20 pairs of eyes stared at me as I walked in, some curious, some bored, 1 or 2 already smirking because they could smell my fear. The teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was a cheerful woman with curly red hair and a voice that could cut through a hurricane. Class, this is Lily's mom, she announced. She's going to show us how she makes her handmade gifts. Applause. Polite, confused, 8-year-old applause. I stood at the front of the room. My hands were sweating. My heart was doing that thing where it forgets how to beat normally. And then I opened my mouth. Hello, I said. My accent was thick that day. The word hello came out like hollow. A few kids giggled. Mrs. Patterson shot them a look. I wanted to run. I wanted to disappear into the floor. But then I saw Lily. She was sitting in the second row, and her hand was in her pocket, the one where she kept the little square I had made for her. She gave me the smallest nod, so I kept going. My English is not perfect, I said, I make mistakes. I say words wrong. But I want to show you something that does not need perfect English. I pulled out the bag of fabric scraps and the needle and thread. Then I held up one of my ugly pouches. The kids leaned forward. This is a gift, I said. I made it with my hands. It took me 2 hours. The stitches are crooked. The button is not in the middle. But I gave it to someone and she cried. Do you know why? A boy in the back raised his hand. Because it was ugly. More giggles. I laughed too. Maybe, I said, but also because it was real. When you make something with your hands, you put time into it, you put attention, you put a piece of yourself, and people can feel that. They don't care if your English is perfect. They don't care if your stitches are straight. They care that you tried. The room got quiet. Even the hamster stopped running on its wheel. I picked up a scrap of blue fabric and started sewing right there in front of them. My fingers moved slowly. The thread kept tangling. I messed up twice and had to start over. But the kids watched. They didn't laugh. They watched like I was performing magic. In this country, I continued, everyone wants to buy things. Big things, shiny things. Things that come in boxes with bows. But a handmade gift? You cannot buy it. You cannot order it on a phone. The only way to get it is for someone to sit down, hurt their fingers, and make it just for you. That is worth more than anything in a store. I held up the piece I was working on, a small heart, lopsided and wrinkled. This heart is for the first person who tells me something they are afraid of. Silence. Then a girl with glasses raised her hand. I'm afraid of the dark, she said. I gave her the heart. She held it like it was made of gold. Another hand shot up. I'm afraid my parents will get divorced. Another heart. Another story. One by one, the kids opened up. They told me about their fears, monsters under the bed, mean older siblings, not being good at math. And for each one, I sewed a tiny, imperfect heart. By the end of the hour, I had given away all 7 pouches and 12 little hearts. The kids were no longer giggling at my accent. They were asking questions. Can you teach me to sew? Where do you get your fabric? Do you sell these on the internet? Mrs. Patterson had tears in her eyes. At the end of the day, Lily ran up to me and hugged me so hard I almost fell over. Mom, she whispered, nobody laughed at you. They loved you. And that was the moment I stopped being afraid of my own voice. Not because I suddenly spoke perfect English, because I realized that connection doesn't come from grammar. It comes from showing up, from being brave enough to be imperfect, from handing someone a crooked heart and saying, this is for you. I made it with my hands, and I made it because you matter. That night, Lily asked me to teach her how to sew more than just squares. We sat at the kitchen table together, 2 pairs of clumsy hands, 2 accents, hers American, mine something else, and we made a mess of thread and fabric. Mark came home and found us laughing. He didn't say anything. He just sat down and watched. Later, he told me that was the first time in years he had seen me look truly happy. Not because my English had improved, but because I had finally stopped hiding. The next day, something even stranger happened. Mrs. Patterson called me and asked if I would come back once a month to teach a small sewing club. The kids won't stop talking about you, she said. They don't care about your accent. They care about your hearts. So I said yes. And that little sewing club, 5 kids, then 10, then 15, became the thing that finally made me feel like I belonged in America. Not because I sounded American, but because I showed up. Because I made things. Because I gave my imperfect self to imperfect people. And they gave themselves back. That is the secret that no English textbook will ever teach you. But part 7 is where the boss comes back. And trust me, what happened next will make you cry even harder. Tears at the desk the day Diane showed me her whole heart. You remember Diane, right? The boss with the starched white shirts and the face that never cracked a smile. The woman who regifted chocolates and made grown employees tremble with a single raised eyebrow. Well, 2 weeks after my school talk, the one where I threw up twice and then sewed hearts for 20 kids, Diane called me into her office again. Not for a review, not for a promotion, for something I never saw coming. I walked in expecting criticism. That was my default setting with her. My hands were already sweating. My brain was already rehearsing apologies. But when I sat down, Diane didn't look at her computer. She didn't have a spreadsheet open or a pen in her hand. She was just sitting there, staring at the lumpy pouch I had given her months ago. The one that looked like a kindergarten project. The one she had kept on her desk, right next to her mother's wedding photo. Close the door, she said. I closed it. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then Diane did something that broke every expectation I had ever had about her. She took the pouch in both hands, that ugly, crooked, misshapen little thing, and she held it like it was a newborn baby. And then she started talking, not as my boss, as a woman. My mother, she said slowly, was not a successful person by American standards. She didn't go to college. She didn't own a house. She worked in a factory for 30 years, sewing buttons onto coats. But every night, she would come home and sew something for me, a dress, a doll, a small bag for my lunch money. Nothing she made was perfect. The stitches were always uneven. The colors never matched, but I saved every single thing she ever made. When she died, I put them all in a box. I haven't opened that box in 10 years. Diane's voice cracked. I had never heard a crack in her voice before. I didn't even know she had cracks. When you gave me this pouch, she continued, I went home that night and opened the box for the first time since her funeral. I sat on my living room floor surrounded by crooked dresses and lumpy dolls and misspelled notes she had sewn into the hems. And I cried for 6 hours. I didn't know what to say. I just sat there, frozen. Diane looked at me, really looked at me, not through me, and said, You probably think I'm a cold person. You probably think I don't care about anyone, but the truth is, I stopped letting myself care after my mother died, because caring hurts, and I didn't want to hurt anymore. That was the moment I understood something I had never understood before. Diane wasn't cold because she was mean. She was cold because she was terrified. Terrified of losing someone else. Terrified of feeling that kind of pain again. So she built walls. She wore starched white shirts. She spoke in short, sharp sentences. She pushed everyone away before they could get close enough to leave a mark. And then I showed up with a lumpy pouch made from an old shirt and a note that said it's not perfect, but neither is anything that matters. And that stupid little pouch, that ugly, crooked, worthless piece of fabric, had climbed over her walls like a tiny, determined spider. "I'm not promoting you because you're a good worker," Diane said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm promoting you because you reminded me that it's okay to be human, that it's okay to make mistakes, that it's okay to cry at your desk in front of your employee." She laughed then. A real laugh, not the cold, polite one she used in meetings. "You have no idea how many people have tried to impress me with expensive gifts. One year, someone gave me a gold bracelet. Another year, someone gave me tickets to Paris. I threw them all in a drawer and forgot about them. But your pouch, it's on my desk, and it's going to stay there until I retire." I started crying then, not a little, a lot. The kind of crying where your nose runs, and your face turns red, and you can't speak for a full minute. Diane handed me a tissue from her desk. Then she handed me something else. A small, folded piece of paper. "Open it later," she said. I nodded, wiped my face, and walked back to my cubicle on legs that felt like rubber bands. When I opened the paper, it was a handwritten note. Diane's handwriting was surprisingly messy, bloops and smudges and crossed out words. It said, "You taught me that small, handmade, imperfect things matter more than anything money can buy. Now let me teach you something. Your English is not a weakness. It is proof that you are brave enough to live in a country where you didn't grow up. Never apologize for it again." I kept that note in my pocket for an entire year. Every time I made a mistake in English, every time someone looked confused or laughed under their breath, I touched that paper and remembered Diane's words. That note was a handmade gift too, not sewn with thread, but written with a trembling hand. And it saved me on days when I wanted to give up. Here's what I learned from Diane's tears. In America, people are starving for authenticity. They are surrounded by filtered photos, curated lives, and conversations that stay on the surface. Everyone is performing. Everyone is pretending. But when someone shows up with a crooked pouch, or a misspelled note, or a voice that stumbles over certain words, that person becomes a mirror. They give others permission to be imperfect too. Diane had been pretending to be strong for so long that she forgot how to be real. My lumpy patch didn't fix her, but it reminded her that real was possible, and that reminder changed her life just as much as it changed mine. That's the power of a small, handmade gift. Not because of what it is, but because of what it represents: time, attention, courage, and the willingness to be seen as imperfect. You don't need perfect English to give that gift. You don't need money or talent. You just need to care enough to try. After that day, Diane and I became something I never expected. Not exactly friends, but something close. She started asking about my kids. She started bringing me fabric scraps from her own sewing box. She even came to one of my school sewing clubs, sitting in the back with her arms crossed, pretending not to smile while the kids showed her their crooked hearts. And at the end of the year, she gave me a gift. A small, handmade thing that she had sewn herself. It was a pouch, lumpy, crooked, imperfect, with a note inside that said, "Now we're even." I still have it, and I still cry every time I look at it. But that's not the end. Because Diane's tears were just the beginning of something even bigger. Part 8 is where my husband finally breaks down. And what he shows me will change our marriage forever. Why small handmade wins, the science of crooked stitches and open hearts. By now you're probably thinking, okay, this is a sweet story. But is there actual proof that small handmade gifts work better than expensive store-bought ones? Or is this just one lucky immigrant with a sewing needle? Fair question. And the answer might surprise you. Because after Diane's tears and the school sewing club and the coupon book that made my husband cry, I got curious. I started reading. I dug into psychology studies, neuroscience papers, and even a few marketing reports that big companies use to understand why people buy things. And what I found blew my mind. It turns out, your brain is wired to value handmade objects differently than factory-made ones. There's a scientific term for it, effort heuristic. That's a fancy way of saying that when you see something that clearly took time and effort to make, your brain automatically assigns it higher value, even if it's objectively uglier or less useful than the perfect thing from a store. Let me give you an example. In one study, researchers gave people two identical-looking scarves. One was described as handmade by a single artisan over several days. The other was described as machine-made in a factory. People were willing to pay almost twice as much for the handmade scarf, even though they looked exactly the same. Why? Because the human brain craves evidence of human effort. We want to know that someone struggled for us, that someone sat down, hurt their fingers, made mistakes, and kept going. That's what the lumpy pouch did for Diane. It wasn't the fabric or the shape. It was the proof that I had spent 2 hours at 2 a.m., tired and shaky, thinking about her. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. The same principle applies to language. When you speak English with an accent, when you make grammar mistakes, when you pause to search for a word, you are essentially giving a handmade version of communication. It's not polished, it's not perfect, but it's real, and real is rare. Most native speakers run on autopilot. They say fine, thanks without meaning it. They ask how are you, while already looking at their phone. Their words are machine-made efficient, smooth, and empty. But when you struggle, when you take an extra second to find the right word, when your accent makes a sentence sound a little crooked, that's the handmade version. And people feel it. They don't always know why, but they feel more connected to you than to the smooth, talking native speaker who never stumbles. I saw this happen at work. After Diane's promotion, I started leading small meetings. My English was still full of holes. I said supposedly instead of supposedly. I mixed up effect and effect. I once told a client that a project would be finished by Thursday or Friday. Depending on the weather, we worked indoors. They laughed. But they also listened because they could tell I was trying. They could see the effort behind every sentence. And effort, it turns out, is more charming than perfection. There's another psychological principle at play here, called the pratfall effect. Studies show that people who are competent but make occasional mistakes are actually more liked than people who are perfectly competent and never mess up. Why? Because mistakes make you human. They make you approachable. When you speak flawless English, Some people feel intimidated. But when you say, I have a question, and accidentally say, I have a quest, they smile. They relax. They think, oh, she's like me. She's not a robot. I tested this on purpose after learning about the pratfall effect. In one meeting, I deliberately mispronounced the word schedule, the American way, then the British way, then a third way that wasn't any way. Everyone laughed. Then they started sharing their own language mistakes. One woman admitted she had said cucumber instead of calculus in a math class. Another man said he once told his wife to pass the remote, but said pass the romance instead. The meeting ended with more laughter than work. But you know what? We also got more done than usual, because laughter breaks down walls, and broken walls make room for collaboration. So here's the truth that no expensive English course will tell you. Your imperfect English is not a problem to be fixed. It is a gift to be given. Every time you speak, you are offering your listeners a chance to connect with something real. You are handing them a lumpy, crooked, handmade sentence. And if they have any heart at all, they will treasure it more than 1,000 perfect, machine-made phrases from a native speaker who never risked anything. That doesn't mean you should stop improving your English. Of course, you should keep learning, keep practicing, keep expanding your vocabulary. But don't wait until you're perfect to open your mouth, because perfect doesn't exist. And even if it did, it would be cold and lonely. Think about the best gifts you've ever received. Were they the most expensive ones? The ones from fancy stores with shiny wrapping paper? Or were they the ones that someone made for you, a drawing, a letter, a meal, a mixtape? The ones that clearly took time and thought. I'll bet it's the second one. Because love doesn't live in price tags. Love lives in effort. And effort is handmade by definition. Diane taught me that. Mark taught me that. Lily taught me that. And now I'm teaching you. You don't need to sew a pouch to prove this. You just need to speak, to write, to show up with your crooked accent and your misplaced prepositions and your I am wanting instead of I want. That's your handmade gift to the world, and the world is starving for it. But here's the hard part. Even after I learned all of this, I still had to go home and face my husband, because Mark wasn't a coworker or a boss or a classroom full of kids. He was the man who had seen me at my worst, tired, scared, yelling in broken sentences. And the next part of the story is where I almost lost him anyway. Because knowing the science of handmade love is one thing. Actually practicing it in a marriage that has been bleeding for years is something else entirely. Part 9 is where the real test begins. And I promise you, it's the messiest, most honest part of this whole story. My husband and kids, the messy test of everything I learned. You would think that after Diane's tears, after the school sewing club, after the science of crooked stitches and open hearts, my marriage would magically heal, that Mark would suddenly understand everything, that we would hold hands and watch the sunset and never fight again. That is not what happened. In fact, things got worse before they got better. Because knowing something in your head and living it in your house are two very different things. The week after Diane gave me that handwritten note, Mark came home from work with a face I had never seen before. Not angry, not tired, empty. The kind of empty that scares you more than yelling. He sat down at the kitchen table, The same table where I had sewn all those pouches. Where Lily had learned to make crooked hearts. And he didn't say anything for a long time. I kept cooking, stirring the pot, pretending everything was normal. Finally, he spoke. I got laid off. 4 words, no emotion. Just a flat, dead sentence. I stopped stirring. The sauce started to bubble over. What? I said. My whole department? He said. They moved it to another state. I have 2 weeks left. Then nothing. I remember thinking, this is the moment. This is where everything falls apart. Because Mark had been carrying us financially. My promotion at work was nice, but it wasn't enough to cover rent, groceries, the kids' school, and all the other things that cost money in America. And now he was gone, not gone from the house, but gone from the role that had defined him. Mark was raised to believe that a man provides, that his worth is tied to his paycheck, that if he can't support his family, he has failed. I had learned this about American culture by then, but knowing it didn't make it easier to watch. He sat at that table for 3 hours without moving. I put the kids to bed. I cleaned the kitchen. I came back and sat next to him. We'll figure it out, I said. He didn't answer. The next 2 weeks were brutal. Mark applied for jobs, dozens of them, hundreds. He got silence, automated rejections, and one interview that ended with "we'll call you." They never called. He stopped eating. He stopped sleeping. He stopped looking at me, the handmade pouches, the crooked hearts, the lessons about imperfection. None of it seemed to matter. Because this wasn't about a gift. This was about survival. And survival, in America, often feels like a solo sport. I tried everything I had learned. I made him a small pouch with a note inside that said "I see you." He put it in his pocket without smiling. I sat next to him on the couch without talking. He didn't move closer. I told him about the science of effort heuristics and the pratfall effect. He said, "That's nice, but it doesn't pay the rent." And he was right. I was throwing handmade love at a financial crisis, and it wasn't working. That's when I almost gave up. Not on Mark, on myself, on the whole idea that small, imperfect things could save anything. I started to think that Diane was an exception, that the school kids were just being polite, that my lumpy pouch had been a lucky accident. I went back to my old habits, staying quiet, apologizing for my English, trying to be invisible. Mark didn't notice. He was too deep in his own darkness. The kids noticed, though. Lily came to me one night and said, "Mom, why aren't you sewing anymore?" I didn't have an answer. "You were happier when you sewed," she said. And then she did something that broke me open. She went to her room, came back with her own little sewing kit, the one I had given her for her birthday, and she sat down at the kitchen table. "I'll sew with you," she said. "We can make something for Dad." So we did. We sat there, mother and daughter, 2 pairs of clumsy hands, and we made the ugliest thing either of us had ever created. It was supposed to be a pillow. It ended up looking like a deflated potato. The fabric was mismatched. The stuffing was lumpy. The stitches were so crooked they looked like a map of a river. But we wrote on it, in permanent marker, "This is how much we love you." It's lumpy because love is lumpy. We left it on Mark's pillow. He found it at 2 a.m. when he came to bed. I pretended to be asleep, but I felt him pick it up. I heard him sniffle. Then I heard him laugh, a quiet, broken, confused laugh. He put the lumpy potato pillow on his nightstand, and in the morning, he said something I will never forget. "You two are ridiculous," he said. But he was smiling. A real smile. The first one in weeks. That pillow didn't get him a job. It didn't pay our bills. But it did something more important. It reminded him that he wasn't alone. That his family saw him not as a paycheck, but as a person. That love, even when it's lumpy and misshapen, is still love. Mark eventually found another job. It took 3 months. Those months were hard. We ate a lot of rice and beans. We stopped buying anything that wasn't essential, but we didn't stop making things. Every week, Lily and I would sew something small for Mark. A bookmark, a keychain, a tiny heart to keep in his car. And he started keeping them. All of them. In a box on his dresser. One night, he opened the box and showed me. "This is what got me through," he said. "Not the interviews, not the applications. These ugly little things you made. They reminded me that I was worth something even when I had nothing." That was the moment I finally understood the full power of handmade gifts. They don't fix problems. They don't erase pain. But they do something that money and perfect English cannot do. They say, "I am here. I am not leaving. And I will keep showing up, even when everything is broken." That's the real happy ending. Not that everything becomes perfect, but that you learn to keep making things, keep offering your crooked, imperfect, handmade self, even when the world says you're not enough. Part 10 is where my daughter teaches me the final lesson, and it's the one that made me stop worrying about my accent forever. My daughter taught me an important lesson, the one that killed my accent shame forever. You remember Lily, right? My 8-year-old with the perfect American accent and the handmade heart in her pocket. The one who once asked me to just wave at school pickup so her friends wouldn't hear my funny voice. Well, a few months after Mark got his new job, after the lumpy potato pillow, after the sewing club and Diane's tears, Lily came home from school with a piece of paper in her hand. Her face was unreadable, not sad, not happy, something in between. "Mom," she said, "I wrote something for you." I was at the kitchen table, as usual, sewing a small pouch for a coworker's birthday. My fingers were covered in thread and fabric fuss. "What is it?" I asked. She handed me the paper. It was a letter, written in her careful, 8-year-old handwriting, with a few misspelled words and a lot of crossed-out lines. And this is what it said. "Dear Mom, I used to be embarrassed when you talked. Your words sound different than other moms. But now I understand. Your words are not wrong. They are just yours. You came to my school, and you were brave even though kids laughed. You sewed hearts for everyone. You taught me that trying is more important than being perfect. So I want to say sorry for asking you to be quiet. And I want to say thank you for being loud anyway. Love, Lily." I read that letter 3 times. The first time, I couldn't see the words because my eyes were too wet. The second time, I laughed at the misspellings. She had written embarrassed as embarrassed and brave as brave. The third time, I folded it carefully and put it in the same pocket where I kept Diane's note. Then I pulled Lily onto my lap, even though she was getting too big for laps, and I held her for a long time. "Your English is perfect," she whispered into my shoulder. "No, it's not," I said, "but that's okay. Because perfect is boring," she giggled. And in that moment, I realized something that no language teacher had ever told me. The shame I felt about my accent, the constant, low-level hum of "you don't belong here," it wasn't coming from my mistakes. It was coming from me. I had been measuring myself against an imaginary standard of native speaker perfection that doesn't even exist. Because here's the truth. No two native speakers sound the same. Americans from Texas sound different from Americans from Boston. People from London sound different from people from Liverpool. Every single person on this planet has an accent to someone else. The only reason I thought mine was bad was because I had been told by movies, by TV, by my own anxious brain, that there is one correct way to speak English, and that my way was not it. But Lily's letter cracked that lie open. She wasn't embarrassed by my accent anymore. She was proud of it. Because my accent was proof that I had left my home country, learned a new language, built a new life, and still found time to sew crooked hearts for bullied kids. My accent wasn't a mistake. It was a medal. The next day, I did something I had never done before. I walked into the office and I didn't apologize for my English. Not once. Not when I mispronounced specific as specific. Not when I said "I'm going to the bathroom" and accidentally said "I'm going to the bathtub." Not when a new client asked me to repeat myself 3 times. I just smiled and repeated myself, slower, clearer. Without shame, Diane noticed. She pulled me aside and said, "You're different today." What changed? I showed her Lily's letter. Diane read it, and her eyes got wet again, which was becoming a theme with us. "She's right," Diane said. "You are brave, and your English is fine. It's better than fine. It's yours." That week, I started recording myself speaking English, not for a class, not for practice, just to hear my own voice without judgment. And for the first time, I didn't cringe. I heard a woman who had survived, who had built a career, who had saved her marriage with lumpy pillows and crooked pouches, who had taught her daughter that imperfection is a superpower. That voice, my voice, was not wrong. It was just different, and different is not a flaw. Different is a gift. Here's the lesson that Lily taught me and that I'm passing on to you. The thing you are most ashamed of, your accent, your grammar mistakes, your slow speaking, your awkward pauses, that thing might actually be your greatest strength because it makes you memorable. It makes you real. It makes you approachable. In a world full of polished, generic, machine-made voices, your handmade accent stands out. People will remember you, not because you sounded like a news anchor, but because you sounded like yourself. I stopped trying to hide my accent after that letter. I stopped rehearsing sentences in my head before saying them. I stopped apologizing for asking people to repeat themselves. And you know what happened? Nothing bad. No one fired me. No one laughed at me. My coworkers started telling me they admired me. My husband started looking at me with new eyes. And my daughter, my beautiful, wise, 8-year-old daughter, started bringing her friends over specifically so they could hear me talk. Listen, she would say, my mom sounds different. Isn't it cool? And they would nod. Some of them even asked me to teach them a few words in my first language. I became the cool mom with the accent. The woman who used to hide in the bathroom during office parties because she was afraid to make small talk. The woman who asked her own daughter to pretend she was invisible. That woman was gone. In her place was someone who finally understood that her voice, with all its lumps and crooked stitches, was not a problem to be fixed. It was a gift to be given. So if you are watching this right now, and you are holding back because your English isn't perfect, let me ask you something. Who told you that perfect was the goal? Who convinced you that your accent is a mistake? It wasn't a native speaker. It was fear. Fear that you don't belong. Fear that you'll be judged. Fear that your handmade voice isn't as good as the machine-made ones. But here's the truth that Lily taught me. Machine-made voices are forgettable. Handmade voices are unforgettable. So stop hiding. Stop apologizing. Stop waiting until you sound right. Because right doesn't exist. And even if it did, it would be boring. Part 11 is where everything comes together. Diane, Mark, Lily, the sewing club, the promotion, the happy ending. And I promise you, it's the most satisfying part of the whole story. But before we get there, I want you to do something. I want you to say one sentence out loud right now, in your imperfect English, with your accent, out loud. Because that sentence is your handmade gift to the world. And the world is waiting. The happy turn. When all the crooked stitches finally made a picture. You know that feeling when you've been staring at a messy sewing project for hours, convinced it's garbage. And then you step back and suddenly see the shape of something beautiful? That was my life 6 months after Lily's letter. Everything had changed, but not in the way you see in movies. There was no single triumphant moment, no standing ovation, no dramatic music. Instead, there was a slow, quiet accumulation of small victories, each one as lumpy and crooked as my patches. But together they formed something I never expected. A life I truly wanted to live. Let me show you what I mean. Diane didn't just keep my pouch on her desk. She started a company-wide tradition called Imperfect Gift Day. Once a month, everyone in the office was invited to bring a handmade gift. No spending money allowed. No store-bought items. No pressure to be good at crafting. The first month, 3 people showed up. One brought a drawing of the office dog. Another brought a poem typed on a typewriter. A third brought a jar of homemade pickles that tasted terrible, but made everyone laugh. Diane gave a small prize to the most imperfect gift. A ceramic mug that said "World's Okayest Boss." I won the second month with a pouch that accidentally had 5 corners instead of 4. By the 6th month, 23 people participated. The IT guy Steve, who never talked to anyone, brought a hand-carved wooden spoon that was so lopsided it couldn't stir anything. He won, and he smiled for the first time in 2 years. That's what handmade love does. It spreads, not because it's perfect, but because it's contagious. Once people see that it's safe to be imperfect, they start giving themselves permission too. Meanwhile, Mark's new job turned out to be better than his old one, not in salary. He actually made less, but in everything else. His new boss was a woman who kept a collection of her kids' failed art projects on her office wall. Drawings of purple dogs, clay pots that leaned sideways, a macaroni necklace that had lost half its macaroni. These remind me why I work, she told Mark on his first day. Not for money, for them. Mark came home that night with a strange look on his face, not empty this time, but curious. She's like you, he said. She keeps ugly things on purpose. I laughed. They're not ugly, I said. They're handmade. He thought about that for a moment. Then he went to his dresser, opened the box where he kept all my lumpy gifts, and took out the potato pillow that Lily and I had made. That pillow stayed on our couch for the next 3 years. Every guest who came over asked about it. And every time, Mark or Lily or I would tell the story. The story of a layoff, a kitchen table, to clumsy hands, and a love that refused to quit. People smiled when they heard it. Some cried. One friend asked if we could make her a lumpy potato pillow too. So we did. Lily and I started a small Saturday workshop in our living room. Just a few neighbors at first, a single mom who wanted to make a gift for her son, an elderly man whose wife had died and who missed having someone to craft with, a teenager who was being bullied at school. We didn't charge anything. We just sat around the kitchen table with fabric scraps and needles and thread, making ugly things together. The teenager, a quiet boy named Marcus, who barely spoke, made a small pouch for his mom. His stitches were so crooked they looked like earthquakes, but when he gave it to her, she burst into tears. No one has ever made me anything, she said. Marcus started coming every week. 6 months later, he brought his own sewing machine, a used one he had bought with money from his first job. He taught me how to use it. I taught him how to fix mistakes. We were learning from each other, the way people do when they stop pretending to be perfect. Lily, meanwhile, had become the unofficial kindness captain at her school. She started a small club called the Crooked Hearts, kids who made handmade gifts for classmates who were feeling lonely or sad. The principal heard about it and asked me to come speak at a school assembly, me, with my accent, in front of 400 people. I said yes, because by then, I had stopped being afraid. I stood on that stage with a microphone, my hands shaking just a little, and I told the story of the lumpy pouch that made my boss cry. I told it in my imperfect English, with my thick accent, misspeaking a few times and laughing at myself. When I finished, the entire auditorium stood up, not because I was a great speaker, because I was a real one. After the assembly, a girl came up to me. She was maybe 10 years old, with glasses and a quiet voice. I'm from Venezuela, she said. I've been here for 3 months. I hate my accent. I knelt down so I could look her in the eyes. Your accent, I said, is not something to hate. It's something to share. It tells people where you came from. It tells people how brave you are. Don't hide it. Don't apologize for it. Just speak. The right people will listen, she nodded. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, crooked piece of fabric. A heart. I made this for you, she said. It's not perfect. I took it, and I cried. Right there in the middle of the school auditorium, surrounded by 400 kids and teachers. Because I understood then that the story had come full circle, I had started by giving a lumpy pouch to Diane. Now a child was giving a lumpy heart to me. That's how handmade love works. It doesn't stay with one person. It keeps going. It keeps growing. It keeps reminding people that they matter. So here's where we are now. Diane still has her pouch. Mark still has his box. Lily still has her pocket heart. And I have a small sewing business that started as a joke and became something real. I sell nothing perfect. Everything I make is intentionally lumpy, crooked, misshapen, and people buy them, not because they're beautiful, because they're true. My English is still not native level. I still say supposedly. I still mix up borrow and lend. I still pause mid-sentence to search for words. But I don't apologize anymore, and neither should you, because the happy ending isn't when you become perfect. The happy ending is when you stop trying to be perfect and start being present. When you give your lumpy self to a lumpy world and say, "Here, this is me, take it or leave it." Most people will take it, because most people are just as scared as you are. They're just better at hiding it. One more part to go. Section 12 is the last one, and in it, I'm going to give you the simplest, most powerful advice I've learned from this whole journey. Advice that applies to English learners, to crafters, to parents, to spouses, to anyone who has ever felt like they don't belong. Stick with me. The best is saved for last. Your first small step, the one sentence that will change everything. So here we are at the end of the story. Diane cried. Mark cried. Lily wrote me a letter. A 10-year-old Venezuelan girl gave me a crooked heart. And I'm still here, sitting at my kitchen table, sewing another lumpy pouch for another person. I want to say I see you too. You might be wondering, after all of this, what's the one thing I would tell someone who is just starting their English journey? Or someone who has been trying for years and still feels stuck? Or someone who is ashamed of their accent, their grammar, their slow speaking, their constant mistakes? I've thought about this a lot. And the answer is simpler than you think. It's not study harder. It's not take more classes. It's not download another app. It's this. Make one small, imperfect thing for someone this week. Not an English essay. Not a perfectly pronounced sentence. A thing. A physical, tangible, handmade thing. A drawing letter. A pouch. A heart. A cookie that burns on one side. A playlist. A poem with misspelled words. Anything that takes time and attention. And then give it to someone, your boss, your spouse, your child, a coworker, a stranger. Don't do it because you want something back. Do it because the act of making and giving will teach you more about connection than any textbook ever can. Let me explain why this works. When you make something with your hands, you stop thinking about yourself. You stop worrying about your accent. You stop rehearsing perfect sentences in your head. Instead, you focus on the person you're making it for. You think about what they like, what they need, what would make them smile. And in that process, your fear of being judged dissolves because you're not performing anymore. You're creating. And creation is the opposite of fear. I saw this happen with Diane. She wasn't thinking about my English when she cried over that pouch. She was thinking about her mother. I saw it with Mark. He wasn't judging my grammar when he held the lumpy potato pillow. He was feeling loved. I saw it with the school kids. They weren't laughing at my accent during the sewing club. They were too busy making their own crooked hearts. Here's the science part, and I'll keep it short because I know you're tired. When you give a handmade gift, both you and the receiver get a hit of oxytocin. That's the neurochemical associated with trust, bonding, and love. Store-bought gifts don't trigger the same response because there's no evidence of your effort. Your brain literally cannot tell if you bought a scarf or stole it. But when someone sees your crooked stitches, your misspelled note, your burnt cookie, their brain knows. This person spent time. This person thought of me. This person was uncomfortable and did it anyway. And that recognition bypasses every language barrier. It doesn't matter if you say, I made this for you with a perfect accent or a thick one. The meaning is the same. The feeling is the same. The connection is the same. So here's my challenge to you. Before you watch another video about grammar rules, before you memorize another vocabulary list, before you spend another hour worrying about your pronunciation, do this. Pick one person in your life. It can be your mother, your partner, your child, your birthday, your neighbor, your boss. Then make them something. It can be tiny. It can be ugly. It can take 5 minutes. Write them a note on a scrap of paper. Draw a stick figure that looks nothing like them. Fold an origami frog that can't jump. Just make sure your hands touch the materials. Just make sure you think about them while you work. And then give it to them. Say, this is for you, I made it. It's not perfect, but I wanted you to have it. Say it in your English. Your imperfect, accented, slow, stumbling English. Say it without apologizing, and then watch what happens. I can't promise they'll cry like Diane. I can't promise they'll keep it forever like Mark. But I can promise you something more important. You will change. Because every time you offer your handmade self to someone, you become a little less afraid, a little more brave, a little more convinced that you belong. That's what happened to me. Not in one dramatic moment, over dozens of small, quiet moments, each pouch, each heart, each letter, each time I handed someone something imperfect and said this is for you. Those moments stacked up like stitches. And eventually, they became a fabric that wrapped around me and said, you are enough. Not when your English is perfect. Not when your sewing is straight. Right now, with all your lumps and crooked edges, you are enough. So go make something. Go give something. Go be imperfect on purpose. And while you're doing it, remember this. The only real mistake is waiting until you're perfect to start. Because perfect never comes, but connection is always available. It's waiting for you at the end of your needle, at the tip of your pen, at the edge of your lips when you open your mouth to speak. So, give. Love. That's the whole story. That's the happy ending. And now it's yours. You just watched a woman with broken English sew a lumpy pouch and change everything, her boss, her marriage, her daughter, even herself. But here's what I didn't tell you. That pouch almost ended up in the trash 3 times because I was convinced it wasn't good enough. Sound familiar? That voice in your head that says your English is too slow, too wrong, too embarrassing? It's lying. And in my next video, I'm going to show you exactly how to shut that voice down using one weird trick from neuroscience. No grammar drills. No expensive courses, just your 2 hands and 5 minutes a day. You won't want to miss it. So here's your call to action. Subscribe right now, because the real magic happens when imperfect people keep showing up. Comment one word, lumpy, if you're ready to stop waiting for perfect English. Like this video if you believe a small, handmade effort can change a life. This channel is not about flawless grammar. It's about real stories, real voices, and real progress. One crooked stitch at a time. See you in the next video.